Welcome to our first English episode of Ankara Policy Center Conversations. I'm Tülin, Daloğlu. My guest today is retired Ambassador Faruk Amil. He will be speaking to us from Islamabad, Pakistan's capital city. Ambassador Amil was last permanent representative of Pakistan to the United Nations in Geneva, and he served in Turkey in mid-1990s. Ambassador Amil, welcome to Ankara Policy Center Conversations.
Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be speaking in Turkey and certainly to this, the esteemed center. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Ambassador, Islamabad hosted the 17th extraordinary session of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Can you please give us a sense of why this extraordinary session was needed, what the foreign ministers decided in the end, and the overall situation in Afghanistan to begin with?
Well, those are very key questions to start off this discussion. The main point was that since August, the Afghan people have been in a very, I would say, a spiral downwards in terms of their human security issues, whether it's food security, whether it's health, all the various indices that matter in any person's life on Earth. And the OIC is an important platform. It's the second largest group after the United Nations. And of course, Turkey is a very active member there as well, along with many of the other leading countries. And Pakistan has always felt that the OIC has a very important moral voice. But in addition to the moral voice, it also has a very practical voice. And if you recall, in 2018, the OIC got together with the EU to talk about the Rohingyas. The OIC has been talking about the Kashmiris, and the OIC has been talking about wherever there are problems that the Muslim populations face. Now, this particularly extraordinary conference of the foreign ministers was called and put together in a matter of a couple of weeks. And that in itself is a huge feat, given the fact that most of the foreign ministers of all the member countries are very busy, and we had a robust, Pakistan had a robust participation from the foreign minister level. I know the Turkish foreign minister was there, along with the Iranian, the Saudi, the Malaysian, the Indonesian. A lot of the key countries were represented. In fact, all the countries were represented at this conference. The aspect is that it was a case of Pakistan seizing the moment. And seizing the moment meant that as the spiral of the Afghan people's plight it's getting worse and worse and worse, what it meant was that something had to be done. And rather than umming and ahhing, and Pakistan grasped the nettle by the hands and said, right, we're going to bring everybody together. And not just the OIC. Remember, this included all the IFIs, it included the P5, it included major donor countries, of course, such as Germany and Japan. The EU was there. And so it brought really everybody together. Of course, it goes without saying that the UN and the UN agencies were there, who continue to play a very vital, important role. So the idea was to bring everybody together to talk about this and have a practical course of action. The government here was very clear, and in the sense that this is not meant to garner a recognition of the Taliban interim government, but certainly it was meant to bring the world's attention and focus on the plight of the Afghans. At a time when...
Ambassador, let me then, jump into the conversation. Have you forgotten about Afghanistan? I think, when the US decided to withdraw from Afghanistan, the scenes that came out of the Kabul airport has really shaken people from their core. But since then, we do not see Afghanistan taking that much space in the foreign media coverage. Is this also a reference to that kind of sentiment?
Well, that's a very important point, because the thing is, there was terrible scenes at the airport, and the worst aspect was that the terrorist bombing by the extremists who were targeting the Daesh, and then there was that incident where lots of innocent civilians were killed in that accidental bombing. So there was mayhem. It was the conclusion of the war. And so I think people were expecting a massive, much more violence. And unfortunately, you're right. I mean, if there'd been a warlike situation, more bloodletting, more graphic images for the television screens, then it may have been, unfortunately, the wrong kind of headline. Because that didn't happen, of course, there are reports and credible reports of acts of violence that have taken place. But by and large, the situation has been peaceful. Now, certainly not to endorse any of what the Taliban has to say. They can speak very well for themselves and through their actions and their words. But the fact is that the war came to an end. And very quickly after the departure of former President Ghani, and suddenly it was all quiet. And so if everything went quiet, then why should the world's attention be refocused everywhere else? So the idea of this conference was, hold on, there is peace there. We're not saying, nobody's saying that everybody wants to recognize the interim government. That's a separate political track. But in the meantime, there has to be a humanitarian response. And I remember, and I'll point this out, I had a sort of a interaction with the UNHCR chief, the excellent Filippo Grandi, had said that we are worried about Afghanistan. And other people had been mentioning this and writing about this. And it was appearing in, let's say, specialist foreign policy circles. Pakistan has always said from day one, irrespective of the government, that there has to be a political solution, keeping in view the humanitarian concerns. Keeping in view the humanitarian concerns, because first and foremost, it has to be, whatever solution, it has to be Afghan-owned, Afghan-led, but it has to take care of all the citizens. So therefore,
let's get to the humanitarian issues, but before we move on, you said something really very interesting, that the war came to an end very rapidly, you said, and that's why the foreign media didn't really have to keep the focus in Afghanistan. Based on that, how do you approach to the legacy of the US in Afghanistan and therefore also the NATO forces?
Well, the thing is, it depends how anybody wants to characterize what the Taliban and what the Afghan people were doing in this. Now, it can be said that was it essentially a rural resistance movement that resisted foreign occupation. Of course, Afghanistan, since the first time the Taliban were in power and the second now, is a very different Afghanistan, because a whole generation has grown up with a new set of freedoms, particularly women empowerment and education for girls. And so Afghanistan itself had changed. So now, because I would suspect that because the Taliban had been engaged in deep conversations with the United States for a long time, and they'd learned, and this is, I think many people have said this, they'd learned the art of negotiation, and they knew their place in the world. Now, they've committed to all kinds of things, which I think it's very important that they should be held to their word. And so far, they are doing that. And remember, it's a country that has been ravaged by war, ravaged by insecurity, and the Taliban had truly never been defeated as an extinguished as a force, because they just hadn't been, and they'd not, you could say, fled to the hills, but they were still there. Now, whether the Western Alliance made mistakes there, I would use the words of the UN, one of the, I think, the iconic UN diplomats, Lakhdar Brahimi, and the Brahimi report in, I think, 2003, 2004, where he likened even then, he likened the international presence like a spaceship. And I remember I was in the Security Council about to deliver Pakistan's statement, and he made this extempore speech, which was very interesting. He said, it's like a spaceship that's landed in the middle the mountainous parts of Afghanistan. And inside this spaceship, there are hot water, clean sheets, and television, and hot food. And outside, at the dusty perimeter, in the darkness and in the dust, are the Afghan people. So when he described that way back when, in 2003, 2004, and then that spaceship has taken off. So when Kai Eide, the Norwegian diplomat, was the SRSG, and he said in September just now, he said, look, 18 million people are on the verge of starvation. And he was saying this in September 2021. And then, of course, everybody knows another renowned UN voice is Mr. Jeffrey Sachs. And he had said this as well. And he was saying, well, out of the trillions that had been spent, only a fraction, maybe, I think the figure is about 3% of all the money had been spent on development. So where did all of that go? Now, there are many stories behind that. The fact is that it was the grassroots development. That did not take place. And that is one of the problems of Afghanistan. And if the entire economy is just about foreign assistance, and there was no true development of the infrastructure, and any given country has all kinds of trade and business. This is very, very important, and that didn't take place. And so the Afghan people have just had this war, and now they've just been dumped. But the OIC conference, the extraordinary conference of foreign ministers, has turned the page.
Okay, I was certainly not trying to cut you short when you wanted to talk about this humanitarian issue, but one of the things that was unanimously decided by the end of this OIC extraordinary session was to bring some, hope to 22.8 million Afghani people who face food shortage. So let's try to also understand the bigger picture in terms of what kind of hardship Afghani people are facing now. I think 3.2 million children and 700,000 pregnant and lactating women are also at risk of acute malnutrition. This sounds really a serious situation, Ambassador Amil.
Yes, it's absolutely, I wouldn't characterize it as serious. I would characterize it as absolutely unacceptable, horrific situation for the people, because the healthcare system began to collapse a couple of months ago. It's completely gone. And if I was to address even the resurgence of polio, Pakistan's been fighting this issue and come very, very close to getting rid of this scourge, which should be. Now, that's going to make a comeback. Because when the healthcare, a basic survival. So if you don't have electricity, you don't have running water, how are you supposed to survive? And then the worst part of this is, and I've used this word before, collective punishment. So if there were sanctions against the Taliban, right or wrong, I'm not going to discuss those, but in the context of expanding those sanctions onto the entire population, women and children. So if the women and children are going to be sanctioned like this because it's collective punishment. But I think the conference turned that corner. And when you see and I think the US Secretary of State made a statement 2 days back, Secretary Blinken was very clear, and he commended the OIC Pakistan had this conference in a tweet. And equally important has been the pressure that has come through, the pressure, and it was the seizing the moment, creating the momentum, which led to the UN Security Council, the UN saying that they would find a way to release the funds. Now, the UN is, there's not a country that doesn't really appreciate the relevance of the UN, and the UN is the most impartial voice. So when WHO, World Food Programme, UNHCR, critical in all of this, and the UN Secretary General himself, all the UN agencies are saying the same thing. They are the impartial voice. So there was no reason at all why any of this assistance to the Afghans in their winter of despair could not be channeled through the UN agencies. I mean, many of them temporarily left when there was flights out, and many of them came to Islamabad, but they're still there and they want to go back and they want to be able to do that. So that would address any of the concerns that some countries or some governments would have about helping the Taliban or helping the people that essentially defeated them, and helping them, those who haven't changed or they won't subscribe to the views of the donors on gender issues, on girls' education primarily.
So, Master Amil, did you have any representation from Taliban in Islamabad for this meeting?
Of course, there was a full, the foreign minister, the interim foreign minister came, and their media came. There was a delegation, and they were very much there. So it would have given them opportunity to interact with everybody else during the course of the conference. And the important thing that the conference brought out was not just, and I've written about this, that warm fuzzy words of the principles and ideal is very important, but there has to be tangible, cold, clear, steps and action. And we're not going to say, well, 3 months down the line, we need to do it now. So it's set into motion, and that was the Islamic Development Bank, which is the would be the natural financial mechanism for the OIC to partner with. And so a trust fund was set up. This was not a conference to garner, pledge this, pledge that, although the Saudi Arabian, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia pledged a sizable amount, I think it was a sizable amount of rial to help to kickstart this, and it's very generous. But the countries where it could help in kind as well. So if you don't have enough, you don't have enough finances, you can help in tents, you can help in clean water, you can help in medicines. And one of the things that that I personally think that they need to move forward is, and I think a number of countries, including Turkey, is very, very active in this, along with Qatar, is the reopening of the airspace. Once that opens up, that should help the Afghans, and they need to have cargo flights, in my opinion. It's very, very important for them. I mean, the passenger flights can start again. They should start again, because apparently the passport offices have been reopened, and the interim government has said anybody who wants to leave can leave. So we have thousands of people at the border with Pakistan waiting to cross, and if action is not taken, and we can come to this, if action is not taken, then there's another wave of refugees. And migrants and refugees people get into a situation where the desperation levels, and they're not fleeing war this time, they're fleeing poverty. They're fleeing no electricity, no water. It's not that, they're being persecuted per se. It's because there's nothing there. And because there's nothing there, that's why they have to leave. So does the world want to have a situation that so many people would want to flee their country in an avoidable, and as the Prime Minister of this country, Prime Minister Imran Khan, has said, it would be a man-made humanitarian disaster. And I fully agree with that, that why create that, and why not? Nobody wants to be a refugee.
Ambassador Amil, help us to understand this. Now, I asked this question before. Maybe it's going to be repetition, but this is going to be, through a different lens, looking at the same question. Now, many people do wonder, after 20 years of US presence and NATO forces presence in Afghanistan, once they depart the country, now you're talking about no electricity, no condition for ordinary people to live in a standard, normal, houses and so. So how is it possible? What is the legacy? What has been the legacy of US presence or NATO forces presence in Afghanistan there? People are having some sort of a difficulty to bring these two ends together. Can you help us understand whether this is something achievable and that US and NATO did not achieve? Or is it something like, I really do not want to say it, but I'm going to state it anyways, or that it's an hopeless case that we cannot in any way help Afghanistan to develop, to progress to some sort of modern living.
Right. I don't think any situation should be described as hopeless, because that is exactly why after the Second World War, there was so much destruction, and in so many places there was complete hopelessness. And out of that hopelessness, the world got together, having learned the lessons of the League of Nations, and created the UN. And if we had a hopelessness, an attitude of hopelessness, then we would approach climate change in the same manner. Well, it's too late. There's too many people. There's too much pollution. We have to never give in to hopelessness. Now, Afghanistan has not been hopeless. There has been development that has taken place. A new, the urban areas are sort of a good infrastructure that is in place. A lot of positive things have happened in that term. But how do you maintain that? So if the engineers don't get paid, I'm talking about the small middle class that is under pressure, that's having to sell, their home furnishings and family heirlooms. So if the doctors and the teachers and the engineers are not going to get paid, the people who run a society, that from day to day, the water technician, all of the people, and if there's no electricity to make society, the infrastructure function, then of course it becomes hopeless. But that hopelessness is predicated on the fact that assistance is required, including assistance that includes the Afghans their own money that has been frozen. Now, is it wise? That's a political decision. It is wise to unfreeze their money. It's their money. It's the Afghan people's money. But they say, well, we're not going to give it to the Taliban. We'd rather find a third mechanism. And so the conference I keep going back to the conference. Why? Because the Islamic Development Bank is a very robust and a very respectable institution, and has done great work around the world. And that is the perfect mechanism to help these people. So we next door in Pakistan cannot afford to have a hopeless case, because it's also damaging the entire prosperity of the region. We start with the person. Why should we allow a person to die an unnecessary death in misery and poverty? They're not dying because of war. They're dying because of lack of medicine, lack of electricity. People who are trained to work in hospitals, who are trained to run the infrastructure, the banking system collapsed. So if you can't go to the bank to get money, how are you supposed to, how are you supposed to live? Then the whole thing grinds to a halt. So the idea is to have the financial structure restart, so that people feel some sense of hope themselves. Once they have a sense of hope, then they're grounded to their communities and societies, because not everybody wants to run away. Who wants to run away? It's only because of war, persecution, and poverty. So these are the reasons why people leave, and this would be yet another unnecessary wave of misery. And you see what's happening in the Mediterranean. You see what's happening. And I'm very familiar with what has happened to Turkey with the Syrian crisis and the Syrian refugees, and Pakistan.
So let's talk about refugees then, Ambassador Amil. I guess, when the US left Afghanistan, that came as a shock to many Afghanis, and they really wanted to flee the country as soon as possible. Certain pictures are going to, stay with people's psyche for a long, long time. But I guess as a neighboring country to Afghanistan, Pakistan received yet another group of Afghani people, as well as Iran, and then another group. I do not know the numbers. That's why I'm just referring to it as group. But these hundreds or thousands, men have fled to Turkey as well. So people react to it, because just as you mentioned, Syria has been a test case for Turkey, where people's nerves are really being tested, that they do wish to see Syria to come to sense of normalcy where people can go back to their country, and that, you know, that Turkey doesn't receive any more refugees. Now, looking at Afghanistan, we're also narrowing down our perceptions to certain topics. Refugee issue is one of them. Help us understand this dilemma. As much as we try to keep our humanity, how are we going to handle all this hardship?
Well, it depends on the nature of the society. I often feel, and I keep going back to the UNHCR, it's very well led by Mr. Grandi, and they have a very sensible and a very genuine, heartfelt understanding and feeling for the refugee. As I said, when I lived in Turkey from UNHCR, I had a T-shirt and it said, Einstein was a refugee. So the thing is, people move on the planet because of fear, because of persecution, because of war. Nobody wants to be killed, and people will move. And of course, now we have climate refugees as well added to the mix. But in Pakistan's case, I'm very. It's very notable that Pakistan has never had any xenophobic voice. Never had. From any of the political parties saying, "Oh, send the Afghans home," and they use that as a platform to win elections. So we've never had that, which is very curious compared to the experience of many of the countries, particularly in the developed countries, where you see the rise of extreme right views, because they feel culturally threatened. Now, we didn't. I mean, you can say that because the co-religion is that we didn't feel that, but Pakistan has a history of we took Polish refugees in 1948. We took the Rohingyas from 1980s onwards. There's a city in the neighborhood in Karachi called Burma Town. Where do you think they all came from? So the Palestinians, and of course the Afghans. 42 years, 5 million refugees. And many of them will never go back because there was so much instability. So Pakistan's position has always been to anchor people in their own homes. Once Afghanistan is part of the, through the ECO, it's at the center of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's very much, and between Pakistan, the Arabian Sea, Gwadar, this marvelous port that's been built, and the Central Asian states. All these these corridors of energy, commerce, all of this is there, and Afghanistan is in the middle. How can Afghanistan not be part of the prosperity that exists in Central Asia or in Pakistan or Iran, and definitely in Turkey? So it needs to be, there is a great future there. So I'm not that hopeless. I don't feel hopeless about the Afghans. It's just that it's Afghan-led. They've got to find their own path culturally and decide for themselves what kind of system do they want. What never works is an externally imposed cultural domination. And that's, I think, we may like it, we may not like it. And of course, on the biggest sticking issue has been the women's rights. And of course, I come from a family of very successful women, and I'd be the last person to say girls must not go to school. Of course they must go to school. The Prime Minister of this country says this, every government in Pakistan says this, the President says that, everybody said this, continues to say this. We had a woman Prime Minister, we had the first speaker.
Still, Afghani women are banned from going to school, Ambassador Amil.
Sorry, excuse me?
Still, Afghani girls are banned from going to school.
Up till now, I'm not going to defend the Taliban, as I said. I'm not.
I'm just understating that, even though and I'm not, really wanted to, highlight it in terms of, feeding to hopelessness. That's not my point. But it is just to, lay out the facts. Unfortunately,
can I
step forward, and then the, few steps have been taken back, and all of those steps, unfortunately, lay a heavy burden on women in all sorts of ages.
Right, but let me sort of answer that in a way that there was an excellent article, and I think maybe your viewers could see this. It's in the New Yorker from a couple of issues back, and it's a very well written piece called I forget who the author is, The Other Afghan Women, and these are the women that live in the rural areas, and there. their experience and their expectations from their life. The issue is that you've got to remember this country was never a centralized society, never. And therefore, if they're going to do it incrementally, and what I've been always advocating is that the Taliban must be held to their promises and their commitments, but they can't just suddenly, overnight, they have a legacy, they have a heritage, and as they incrementally open in the urban areas, and they've allowed women to return to work in essential services, which are medicine, of course, in the healthcare sector. There are restrictions, I understand, in the universities, and they're not very, many people, the Afghan academics are not happy, of course. I can understand that. So that is why the assistance and the help to Pakistan, to Afghanistan, should be predicated on Taliban honoring its promises. And they're saying all the right things. And it's only been a few months, but in the meantime, why crush the entire population? How can girls go back to school if the teachers are not being paid? And the teachers are not being paid because the banks are closed, and the banks are closed because the government has no money. So how is that whole cycle going to restart? So the first thing is to address the financial crisis and help the Afghan people. Okay, you don't want to give it to the Taliban, give it through this trust fund, work through the Islamic Development Bank, and work through the impartial agencies of the United Nations, who are all present.
Do you think their security will be protected when they do that and work in Afghanistan?
Well, the UN's already there. And thank God, there's been no outrage committed against the UN agencies. However, having said that, you see the non-state, the danger of leaving Afghanistan alone is not just I haven't even talked about COVID or polio, but the danger is having non-state actors re-emerge there. That is in nobody's interest. And first and foremost, those non-state actors and their supporters, whoever they are, and there can be multiple, including some states as well, and some other governments who don't want to see stability in Afghanistan for whatever reason. Why wouldn't they? They would absolutely try to disrupt the international help, and first and foremost go after the UN to frighten everybody. It's happened elsewhere in other parts of the world. So this is something that we need to be cognizant of, and most importantly, the Taliban is not like supporting them, but if they can hold the peace and ensure that nobody's being killed, then the terrorist groups, the ones that everybody knows are terrorist groups and who have said that they would do this, and particularly the Daesh, they'd be the ones. And affiliates, and it's a very loose amalgam of these groups that are used or they're misguided, but they can cause havoc. And in a vacuum, they will grow. So why allow that vacuum?
Right, I totally hear you, Ambassador Amil. Now, it's been over half an hour. I think we're getting close to the end of our conversation. But before we close out, you said Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu was in Islamabad to attend the OIC extraordinary session. And with that, before closing out, I wanted to ask you anything you'd like to share about Turkey-Pakistani relationship and how they can together help Afghanistan. Are there any new things that you may like to share with us on this topic?
Well, first thing I would say, it's always an honor to have our Turkish sisters and brothers in Pakistan, and we feel the same whenever we come to Turkey, absolutely. And the Turkish foreign minister's participation was critical because Turkey is a hugely important player regionally in Europe, in the Middle East, and certainly in the Central Asia and this West Asia scenarios. So it's extremely important. And the thing is, irrespective, and I keep saying this, irrespective of who's in power in Ankara or in Islamabad, Pakistan and Turkey have always coordinated their positions, have always had immensely close relations on and understanding on so many issues that they're too long to list here. And there's this very deep bond that continues with every government. So whatever is happening in the current situation is only a reiteration of our traditionally strong bilateral friendship on every level. You know, governments can come and go. It happens all the time, everywhere. And I've seen this. It's a people to people. There's a national perception about. I certainly know in Pakistan there's a national perception about Turkey being Pakistan's really good friend. Of course, we wish we could translate that into greater economic cooperation. I mean, we'd love to have more Turkish tourists here, and I know Pakistanis are coming en masse to the middle class has discovered Istanbul and the Akdeniz, and they're coming there. So we have this bond between the people. So the sorry, I think I lost. Hello.
No,
hello?
You're back. No worries, you're back again.
Yeah, somebody was calling me, so unfortunately, so we have. It was very important for the Turkish foreign minister, and I know a definitely important bilateral interaction between the Pakistani and the Turkish foreign ministers took place, and other like-minded foreign ministers. You could see at these kind of international conferences, even scheduled, there are scheduled bilateral meetings, but there are also impromptu meetings that take place, very quick meetings that at the sidelines, you can have a 20-minute conversation or a 5-minute conversation. So all of that is taking place. And it gave yet another opportunity for Pakistan and Turkey to coordinate. So we could have a separate discussion about Pakistan and Turkey relations on another occasion. But I think this, again, this conference reiterated our strong bonds.
Thank you, Ambassador Amil, for this in-depth, analysis of what's taking place in Afghanistan, and also have this meeting of OIC in Islamabad has taken place and what it promised to Afghani people. And I think what you basically lay out is that it's all about networking, it's all about constructive thinking against hopelessness, and that as long as we keep our hands together, we always have a chance to build a better world.
That's right. I fully agree. You know, bridges, not walls. Bridges, not walls.
Right. Thank you so much, Ambassador Amil, again.
Thank you very much for this conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, it's our thanks. Well, we come to the end of our first episode in English of our Ankara Policy Center Conversations. Please keep tuned into our channel. We will have more conversations in the next year as well. Thank you.